I brought the alpha and we won it. When it's normal for the judge to hear women, you will be heard in a different way. Your argument will be heard for its own, on its own merits. Their obeisance to the patriarchy does not protect them from the brutality of the patriarchy at all times. It will, it's like giving hafta. You know, you give hafta to the gunda, don't give the hafta. This is our word. Winning, connecting to that judge, getting that judgment, I hate losing. The hard work that engenders the brilliance. The Bhopal litigation is sort of cancerous sore, I think, on our polity and on our constitution and all our consciences. Not only had they been poisoned by the gas, but they were also drinking water laced with toxic chemicals. We have documents to show, memos, to show that Union Carbide commissioned studies and put fish in that same water. And, you know, over, I think 90% of those fish had died.
In 74 years, the Supreme Court of India has designated only 583 senior advocates. Less than 10% have been women. My guest today is one of those who created history. Karuna Nundy was designated Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court of India in January 2024. She has helped draft India's anti-rape laws after the gruesome 2012 Delhi Nirbhaya case. She has also fought for Bhopal gas tragedy survivors and represented Paytm in a landmark case enforcing India's first blockchain regulations. One of her most important cases has been arguing in front of the highest court of the country to criminalize marital rape. And she's bravely called it what it is: people versus patriarchy. In fact, Time magazine has recognized her as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2022. Everything Karuna has built, she has built in an institution where there are barely any women at the top. So I ask her, what lies behind the accomplishments, the decisions, what it has cost her, what to fight for, what to give up, and is it really ever enough? I'm Salone Sehgal. This is Alpha Women, in partnership with Spotify and Outlook Business. Karuna, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Pleasure to be here.
You have an incredible bio. In fact, when I looked at it, I wondered how someone can do so much in such little time. You have an incredible body of work. It's almost at the confluence of purpose, passion, and principle. You have an incredible commercial litigation practice, human rights practice. You're an international advisor to sovereign governments. You've argued some really path-breaking cases, and you've done it for now 2 decades.
Thank you so much. Put like that.
I want to go back to the choice that you made about picking a career in litigation, right?
Yeah.
I have heard you say that litigation is hard. The hours are hard, the adjournments are hard. Your version of justice can differ from the bench's version of what is agreeable and what is not.
Yeah.
And, I think you described litigation in a very interesting way. You said it's like performing surgery, but when the opposing party is trying, the opposition is trying to knock the scalpel out of your hand.
Exactly.
What does litigation represent for you? Why did you pick litigation? You could have had the same money choices, or actually,
bigger money
or
choices.
more money in a corporate career.
Yeah.
Why litigation?
I love it. I love it.
What part of it?
I love being able to, and this is just not just me, I mean, this is the requirement, I think, of the job, right? To do sort of intellectual somersaults on a high wire, right? And then translate that into the simplest, the shortest possible route to a victory. Because it's very high impact, right? Like either you win or you lose.
Yeah.
And whether it's for the individual and their job divorce, children coming to them, small little firm company, or whether it's the huge company where and these are all real cases, the huge company where the directors are being prosecuted for something they didn't actually do at all, right? Which even under the law is not their responsibility. What it means to the client is huge. So the impact that you have, right? The sort of living or dying. It's kind of like being a surgeon.
Yeah.
Which my father.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's true.
And I love the aspect of doing the work and the sort of the fact that I keep learning that I can get better and better and better. At this stage, even you keep growing.
Yeah.
And the flow that comes when you're really in it and coming up with those ideas that solves the person's problem. Winning, connecting to that judge, getting that judgment. I hate losing. I hate losing. I'm much better at it now, but I hate it. And increasing your rate of winning as you get better and better and better. What's not to learn?
Tell me about a case where you felt that you got outmaneuvered or you lost it, and what did that teach you? Because you've won so many cases. Some of them have been path-breaking. They're landmark. Actually, you choose your causes and cases in a certain way.
Yeah.
But what about the cases where you lost? What did that teach you?
So there was a curative petition in one of the Bhopal cases. Now for Bhopal, we've been able to get large numbers of communities safe water, for example, because not only were they being, and some of them are still as the toxic waste spreads, being, not only had they been poisoned by the gas, but they were also drinking water laced with toxic chemicals and Union Carbide. We have documents to show, memos, to show that Union Carbide had commissioned studies and put fish in that same water. And, over, I think 90% of those fish had died.
Wow.
Right? They knew that we have memos to show through the US discovery process that the so-called solar evaporation plastic sheets to prevent their toxic waste leaching into the groundwater had sprung leaks. So they knew all of this, right? And the Bhopal litigation is sort of, I think, a continuing, not the whole litigation, but we have had some justice, but is a sort of cancerous sore, I think, on our polity and on our constitution and all our consciences. And we, in 2010, 2011, managed to reopen it, right? Because we said that, look, all of this shows fraud. All of this shows collusion by Union Carbide and, that then became Dow Chemicals. And we worked incredibly hard on it, for years, people around the world. And different kinds of law, piercing corporate veils between Union Carbide India Limited and UCC, the corporation in New York, piercing the corporate veil between UCC and Dow Chemicals. And so it involved corporate liability, New York law, Delaware law. It included tort law, obviously here, criminal laws, the criminal litigation that's still going on, where they failed to appear. And they proclaimed absconders. And they appeared before the court, these proclaimed absconders, right? Represented by Mr. Harish Salve. The court didn't say that, look, go show up in your criminal litigation and then we'll hear you. 5 judges of the court, right? They did not say that. They said that we don't like me raising the fraud issue because the union government didn't raise the fraud issue, the Attorney General. And then they said that the Attorney General loses, right? Because the BJP government and we were on the same side this time. Because he didn't raise the fraud issue. It's a very short order, you should read it. And I think after that, I sort of felt, I don't quite know, I'm not sure I should be here. Because our case was extremely robust. And some of the judges on that bench, and I, obviously won't name them, were very justice-oriented otherwise. And after that order, actually, a huge number of people wrote about it and wrote, Professor Upendra Bakshi, wrote a strong op-ed against it. A number of other people did because they were so outraged because they saw our case and they saw what we had presented,
It's a very emotional issue for you.
Yeah.
I can feel your outrage, the disappointment, it is
anger,
and the frustration with where I guess justice was denied.
Yes.
And tell me about what, you questioned yourself, but what did it teach you?
That justice is very much a part of the structure of political economy, right?
So you mean it's very closely linked? Or
I think that to say that how dare the victims bring up a fraud argument when the documents are before you, right, is something that could not have been said 40 or 50 years ago. And I think the political economy has changed because the corporate governmental nexus is much stronger now. The electoral bonds were only a symptom of that. The reality has not changed dramatically.
You come across as somebody who's very excellence oriented. You mentioned earlier that you like winning. You're also somebody who's very detail oriented. Whenever I've seen you speak, you're very deliberate, you're very measured. There is a certain degree of exacting standards that one needs to be able to function at a certain level of performance, which you do. I come from a world of venture capital where outcomes take very long. And outcomes are also uncertain. So I have realized that the only thing I can do is control the inputs.
Yes.
How do you maintain excellence in a world where outcomes are uncertain? What does that look like in your field, and how do you do it?
I do have very high standards, and I have very high standards for myself, and I have very high standards for my team. Because the client has entrusted us with their very important interest, whatever that may be, right? And so there's no question of compromising on that at all. Now, sometimes I can be perfectionist, I'm learning to keep those high standards, but also to allow for humanity, in the sense that when I see that somebody is struggling in my team, for example, right? And to meet those high standards immediately. I mean, I have faced laziness and I'm not okay with it. But then I give kind of more staggered deadlines, for example, right? When Arjun saw the fish's eye, what was in Arjun's control? How he held the bow. The sort of presence that he brought to it, the manner in which all the years of practice and diligence that he had put in, how he aimed, his killer instinct, how he released the arrow. But once he released the arrow, it's out of his hands.
Yes.
Right? So that combination of killer instinct and nishkama karma. That you have to put every single thing you have into it. You have to. Everything you have.
Very recently, the Supreme Court Bar Association did a survey of about 2,500 women professionals across 23 state bar councils. And the statistics were very dismal, right? 82% of the women surveyed said that their journeys were harder than male counterparts. 72% said that their gender had hindered their professional networking. And over 60% actually said that their careers were limited because of their gender. And I just heard from your team that on the Supreme Court, there is only one woman judge. There is no female attorney general, no female solicitor general. In my world, these statistics are as bad, right? There are less than 10% of partners in venture capital funds are women. And out of every 100 rupees, only 4 goes to a woman founder. So, when I look at these statistics and I see them
they're as bad.
Yeah, when I see them in entrepreneurship, I see them in the corporate world, I see them in the legal profession. And, the two of us sit here and have this conversation and we talk about, how we want to make a positive impact and change the world. Tell me, what can society do? What does each Indian home do to make these statistics better?
Society is us.
Yeah. So all of us, what do we do?
All of us, right?
Yeah.
So I think to just place the responsibility with parents and grandparents, while it's important, I think it's only part of the story, right? If we're talking about the home, I think making sure that boys grow up to understand that they are people first, and that they have a huge amount of privilege, but also burden because of the patriarchy.
But what does that look like? Is it telling them, because look, we've seen the Harvey Weinstein era with Me Too, and we thought, things would change. And then the depravities of the Jeffrey Epstein files come out, and actually nothing has changed.
But Salone, things have changed.
Have they changed?
When I
We've just become better at talking about it.
No, when I started out, right, there was one woman on the Supreme Court, Rumapal. Now there is still one woman in the Supreme Court. Right? That hasn't changed. But about three Sundays ago, we had a day-long conference which was only focused on making the bench equal. And in the audience, there were only Supreme Court women lawyers. It was all people who can and should change this, right? I was moderating one of the panels. The people who organized it were Shobha Gupta and Mahalakshmi, both senior advocates. The choice they made to have only women in the audience was a brilliant choice. It's a brilliant choice. You know why? Because the accountability is different. And because the urge to then do some kind of balancing act then disappears, I think. Now, since that, we have seen, and I hope that this is a trend, there were commitments that were made by the top judges, right? And we have seen now in these most recent appointments to the High Court, more women, far more women actually. And the chief has also been speaking about this in a much bigger way, etc. So look, I think the interventions can't just be one thing. But I also want to say that when I had entered the Supreme Court in 2002, it was a very different place. There were very few women arguing. And now you have so many women arguing at all levels, at the most senior levels, at just down the line. And seeing a woman litigator is really, it's just really very frequent, So it's very different. The fact that we have so many women senior counsel, I know the percentages are tiny, right? But earlier we had 2 people. We had a lady called Shamla Pappu and we had Indira Jaising, and that was it. We had 2 people. So the fact that we can now even speak of percentage terms.
I go for tech conferences, right? There's this persistent problem of manels, where it's only men, right? In fact, I don't know, there's this...
Everywhere, not just...
everywhere probably. These media companies, they do these awards, the startup awards, these various corporate awards.
And the juries are all men.
The juries are all men. Or they'll have one token woman. If you look at podcasts, less than 9% of speakers are women. And actually, that's part of the genesis of having this podcast, because I'm shocked that we can't seem to find more accomplished women. And every time I speak to men and women both, I'll tell you 2 perspectives. The men are like, oh, there are not enough women out there, or we don't know enough accomplished women in our networks. That's one. Then on the other side, the female perspective, now there are some women who have devoted their careers to helping other women. But there are women, several high-performing women, who have now started to say, hey, I don't want gender to be the focal point of my accomplishments or about my career. I don't want to be in women-only panels or women-only shows. And my argument to them is that, do you think a man is thinking like that? Because when the man walks into the room, when he sees other men around it, it's not odd for him. But now women, especially high-performing women, are saying, hey, I don't want to walk into a room where there are only other women. Or their advice to women will be, hey, just be tough, take risks, be bold.
Don't let your gender matter.
Don't let your gender matter. But there are structural obstacles for women which do not exist for men. And when we keep speaking to women, telling them, I don't think it's helping, to be honest, because we already know our problems.
So there are two things here, I think, that you're saying. I think one is that there's a sort of, that's the pick-me woman.
It's the queen bee syndrome.
No, it's not queen bee syndrome.
No?
It's the pick-me woman.
Okay, tell me about that.
It's the idea that used to be prevalent, I think, maybe about, say, 20 years ago, right? That it appears to me that there's only room for one person, so let me be it.
Yeah, but that's
so
a queen. Yeah, it's the same queen bee syndrome.
So it's not queen bee. You're not really a queen. You're just like there's all the kings, and you're like, can I be the person who also gets to be nice to you, right? Right. So it's like a load of tripe. It doesn't actually. It may get you somewhere in the moment, but unless you think of it in structural ways, unless you think about it. Unless you call out the mantle and you use your power to say that I'm not going to be on the mantle unless you're one other woman, right? Very frequently they will change it, right? Especially on these tech mantles, and it's more prevalent in tech. The thing is that the realization that when you are not an outlier, right? When it's normal for the judge to hear women, you will be heard in a different way. Your argument will be heard on its own merits. It's much more likely to be heard on its own merits, right? You will stop being the woman lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? It'll happen when it is common to have women.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that's what some people don't understand. It's a very outdated pick-me sort of. And the trouble is that, the woman who says that, I am just a person and I'm just neutral and etc. Right? They will get rude shocks from time to time when they find out that their obeisance to the patriarchy does not protect them from the brutality of the patriarchy at all times. It's like giving hafta. You give hafta to the gunda will indulge you for a while, and then the gunda could easily turn against you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't give the hafta.
Yeah. And that's actually the greatest imperative to support other women, because men do it all the time. That's the greatest imperative.
I think the greatest imperative to support other women is because it's the right thing to do.
Also the right thing to do, but for a lot of people, it's about, what is it in it for me? Is it? And I keep telling women, like, you don't become less special, less. And there are a lot of women who take pride in, I'm the only woman who has achieved this. I'm the only person who has done this. And for me, that statistic is very sad, actually. That if you are the first, it is okay to be early.
People love being the first.
Yeah, but don't be the only. Because if you're the only, you have to ask yourself why.
I don't know about that. I think that, look, it depends on what you're doing also, right? Like, there's a sense in which, I don't know who the first woman is to set up her VC fund. You might be the first.
Yeah, I do know.
Are you the first?
No. There's Vani Kola, who's one of the original OGs of the VC world. She was actually one of the first few women to found and institutionally build a venture capital platform. It started in 2006 in India.
So I think to do that, right, it creates the first precedent.
Yes, but she's not the only.
No, but she is the first.
Yes, And that's great.
No.
Yeah.
So I'm saying to be the first
Yeah.
is not easy.
Yeah. So
It's really
yeah,
hard.
Absolutely.
Right? And there's a way in which you are to be the first woman president in the US, to be the first woman vice president in the US. It's like a set of challenges that nobody has ever faced before and that you have overcome.
Yeah.
Now, you overcome that by getting the support of a lot of women, but also men, particularly within the system, who will help open the doors from within, allies, right? You will do that by strategizing, by being more brilliant than the next person, because you have to be much better than the next person, let's face it, right? And you will, there is the aspect of individualism about it that I think cannot be ignored and is also vital in spaces where that is those are the parts.
Yeah.
Right. So now, should you do that by walking over other women? Obviously not.
Yeah.
You know, should you do that by getting the muscle that you get from other women and men? Absolutely. I would still say that representation on the courts is vital. You know, I would still say representation in VCs, etc., is a good in and of itself. Obviously, you don't want people who aren't very good. You don't want people who aren't good.
No, but I'll tell you why.
But it's still a value.
I'll tell you why that's not good.
Why?
Is because
because you shut down parts.
No, because the only then starts to represent all. Right? So when that one woman doesn't perform, when the one woman is mediocre, when that one woman is unreasonable, she starts to represent all women. And that is why the only is a problem.
And then there's that pressure on her.
Yes. Karuna, you spent your life working in a male-dominated environment. You know, and so have I. I spent, I started my career in investment banking, then private equity, entrepreneurship, and now venture capital. I realized very early on that I was not the smartest person in the room, but I will be the most prepared. Right? And as a woman particularly, I felt that I needed to be undeniable to make my voice heard.
Yes.
And perhaps it was the professional settings that I was operating in that I realized that if I ever said, oh, this is how I feel, it wasn't taken seriously. But if I came armed with data and facts, that's what it took to have a room listen to me.
Right.
Does that resonate with you? Do you believe you had to do more, work harder, be better than your male counterparts to be heard? Especially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You have to, but I will also say that, there was this meme going around on social media a few years ago of me in some magazine in front of the Supreme Court looking out into the middle distance, sort of envisioning justice, presumably, right? And they said, so this is the dream. And they said, this is the reality of some, young associate under piles of paper. And I was kind of amused when I saw it, but I also sort of reposted it. And I said that, it's the hard work that engenders the brilliance, right? It's the idea at the bottom of the pile. It's the willingness to, and the joy actually, in doing the work and finding that idea, or letting your reading and following your curiosity in your judgments, and and maybe even talking to people and getting advice, etc. When you're younger, that can bring the idea that that wins the constitutional case. I want to say this, that I have a lot of privilege. I have a huge amount of privilege, right? So I grew up with not a lot of money, but I grew up with parents who read to me every day. I have all the educational privilege, right?
Yeah.
I have the huge caste privilege. I have the language privilege, because what in the space that I operate in is about language, So I'm able to deal with it in terms of specifics and passing ideas, or not just linguistically, but also linguistically, lexically, legally, right?
Yeah.
In a way that the next person hasn't had the experience and the support to do so. Like if you grew up speaking Maithili and Hindi primarily, right? You're not going to have the same head start.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's true that being a woman, one has had to be much better than the next guy. Not
Yeah.
better, much better.
Yes.
And the next guy maybe didn't have all these other privileges that I do have. Even then, I had to be much better.
Yeah.
And I'm delighted to say that there is less of a burden on women now. And I think it is all our jobs to remove that burden entirely, right? So that you can shine without having to do so much more. But I also think, it comes back to that idea of excellence. I think excellence is a goal in and of itself.
Yes.
It puts you in a position of winning much more. It increases your likelihood of winning.
Yes.
It makes it much higher. But also if you did all that and then it didn't work, then you're not going to blame yourself. And I also want to say that I think I present as quite feminine, I think, but inside, I'm really quite they, them. Like, really.
Why is that? Like, just what part of the gender construct do you feel doesn't resonate with you?
I think it's false. I think these gender constructs are false because they associate a particular biological fact with a whole set of characteristics which have no rational nexus with the biological fact. There are huge expectations and labels and boxes that come with being either a woman or a man. I think that gender is a continuum, and I think it's a continuum that flows. So today I may feel like someone who is feeling soft and nurturing, right? And I am soft and nurturing in many ways, but tomorrow that same part of me may not even be there, right?
No, I agree.
And also, I think this idea of, while it's true that women can, be venture capitalists and, plumbers and whatever, right? JCB drivers and lawyers. It's the set of characteristics that people get associated with, and the boxes, which is why the patriarchy makes men more violent. It makes men suffer in terms of what they can choose in their professions. It pressurizes men to be the main breadwinner. It violates their emotions in terms of requiring them to be tough and not be vulnerable. Now, to be clear, men benefit hugely also from the patriarchy, but they also suffer hugely because of it.
Yeah,
right?
But we're talking, that's from my understanding, what you're saying is a lot talking about gender stereotypes and gender roles. But let's say if we talk about the biological reality of being a woman in a workplace, is very different from a man's biological reality of being a man. A woman has to go through menstrual cycles. She'll go through perimenopause. She goes through menopause. That causes a tremendous amount of emotional, hormonal, chemical changes within her body, which impacts the way she turns up to do the job, which is not the case for a man. Now imagine that on top of the fact that women tend to carry twice as much mental load of running a household than that of a man. They also have twice as much caregiving load as that of a man. And this is global statistics, not just in India. In India, it's probably even more.
Yeah.
So now when you put that lens and then say, oh, but men and women are equal, the gender construct is just a continuum, it is very fluid, I don't believe that to be the case.
Taking the easy question first, right? Which is that women have to balance work and home much more often.
Sure.
That's purely because of the construct.
Yeah,
and that's purely because of the patriarchy.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, fair.
So we can put that aside quite easily. Now, in terms of the biology, I think, look, biology like operates in lots of different ways, right? Like, if you have, there's a lot of focus on menstrual leave, but
Yes.
I think if we abstract ourselves from that and think of it as reasonable accommodation, for people who are, quite functional but have, say, who are maybe bipolar, right? Or for people who are the only supporting member of their family for a parent who has cancer, or etc. And if we think of it as reasonable accommodation and include menstrual leave in it, but with the understanding that different circumstances require different things, right? So menstrual leave comes every month now, which is why there's a huge debate over it, right? I mean, the point being that if you don't need it, there's no need to be the pain-free hero. It's okay, great that you don't need it, don't take it. It's like maternity leave. You don't have a kid, don't take the maternity leave. Right? You don't have a painful period, don't take the menstrual leave. You don't have a person at home who needs taking care of, don't take that occasional leave. So that's a way to deal with, which is not just, so I think that there's a balance that one has to have when one looks at historical prejudice and the categories of historical prejudice, right? And allowing for substantive equality rather than just formal equality, saying that, okay, so this is where the finishing line is, and all of you, just start. Whereas the man is over here, and the woman is somewhere there. So make that reasonable accommodation, right?
Yeah.
And people will argue that, but then I won't be hired because the company is going to be going to discriminate against me. And this is not an unfounded fear. This is why it's absolutely crazy, really, that we don't have a robust law against non-discrimination.
Yeah.
We have constitutional provisions, but we don't have statutes that say that you have to be given, that you have to treat people equally, that you have to, that, we have a little bit like in POSH, but the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, right? Where you can't have backlash discrimination. You can't, there are various, but there isn't a across the board thing. So what we do, and we do these large scale workshops with companies. We've done it for Bertelsmann, we've done it for the investment branch, we've done it for Penguin Random House, we've done it for The Wire, is we do these workshops that don't just focus on the prevention of sexual harassment. We look at equality, right? We look at people talking to each other, drawing boundaries, respecting each other from wherever they may come, which is why we then divide people up into male groups, female groups, and other, right? Which speaks to the balancing the idea of the continuum with the existing silos.
Yeah.
Because people then identify with whatever they identify with most. So despite my inner feeling of being a person, like I really do feel like a person, I would identify with the women because I get treated as a woman. I only get treated as a woman, right? And I present as a woman.
Yeah.
Right?
This menstrual leave, I want to go back to it because this was a heated topic in our team.
Right.
Right? There were all my team members, the women.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, menstrual leave makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And there used to be women in their previous companies who used to take menstrual leave.
Yeah.
My view is that, the 2 generations above us, the first generation of women were fighting for, the right for voting, the right to be inheriting property. They fought that fight.
Yeah.
The second generation, my mother's generation, fought to be in rooms and boardrooms and corporates. Our generation is fighting to stay in those rooms and reach leadership. The next generation has been given the benefit of all of this, and now I believe that they are saying, hey, we need to be differentiated because we're women, and hence give us menstrual leave, give us all these things. And that goes back to your starting point, is that actually we're pushing that starting line even further, because menstrual leave or giving special leave just because you're a woman would work in an equal society. We're not an equal society. It is a man's world where power, capital, wealth is heavily concentrated in male hands.
Yeah.
So when you start saying that women are different and we have different needs, and that needs to be recognized legislatively, the male business owner is thinking, hey, I don't want to fall foul of the legislation or the regulation or the policy which requires me to have a worker who's not going to be available to me certain months of the year, certain days of the year. Hey, maybe I'm not going to hire that person. Right? That is why a lot of women post their maternity leaves are not made comfortable coming back into their jobs, right? That's why they get weeded out. A lot of men don't hire women at a certain marriageable age because they feel like, okay, this person's going to go on maternity leave soon. Why do women churn out at a mid-level to senior level? Because they just don't make it to the top, because it just becomes harder for them to be promoted. So I feel that, legislation, policy, polity, they can all solve for everything else, but fundamentally, we're in a man's world. And as women, we have to learn to accept that to some extent, and to not fight for the battles like,
so Salone, you and
like
I,
menstrual leaves.
this is our world, right?
Yeah, this is our
Why
world.
is that?
Yeah.
Why is that? Because we run our own
Yes.
outfits, which have
Yes.
high impact, but numbers-wise, they're not huge.
Yes.
Right? Now, I think this means a number of things. It means that when people have to show up, they have to show up because
Yeah.
the team is so small.
Yes.
Right? But I think it also means that we make the rules.
Yeah.
So we don't speak in the abstract. In the Disability Rights Act, there's this idea of reasonable accommodation, And the idea of reasonable accommodation is that we are all human. So we all carry each other, So there will be times that I will need reasonable accommodation. And we can't just presume that because I am the boss of the chamber, that I'm the only one who gets reasonable accommodation because I own the means of production.
I understand.
Right?
Yeah.
That others can and should also be accommodated to the extent that it's reasonable.
When I did, looked at what your parents did, they
Yeah.
also actually did the very same thing. They had
Yes.
international careers,
Yes.
and then they came back and devoted themselves to public service.
Yes.
And your father's a very celebrated surgeon, and
Yes.
is a Padma Shri
Yes.
recipient. So is this part of the family legacy?
So far. So far. But also I also saw them give up a lot of money, which was very helpful because, I think Harvard was paying $130,000 at the time, which was in the 19...
Wow.
A very long time ago, right? 1975.
Yeah, that's yeah, okay.
Right?
So inflation adjusted.
Yeah, inflation adjusted. And they came back, and my father was then making 900 rupees a month. And the thing is that money was a bit of an issue because they'd given up a lot of privilege. But that sense of purpose and meaning and joy is such special modeling to have. I was also clear that I don't want to worry about money, and so therefore I'm quite comfortable. I've made those choices.
Yes.
And I think it's important as women to talk about money and to talk about choices because there are trade-offs, right? So I've made the choice to make a certain amount of money, not as much money as I can, because I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
That's not what brings me meaning, But to make a certain amount of money and to engage in a life of contribution, meaning, connection, and stimulation.
Yeah. So when you were young, were there conversations at home around money, and did it go hand in hand with, hey, you need to have a certain level of education.
Yeah.
Then you need to make yourself financially independent, and at the same time, pursue a life of purpose. Was that dinner table conversations?
No. Dinner table conversation was, you must pursue a life of purpose and contribution and giving back, and that's where you will find fulfillment. And sometimes, my dad would go and give a talk, or my mother would go and give a talk, and then one of them would say that, oh, we're not going to take some honorarium. Sometimes they give some whatever, some few hundreds, few thousand, whatever. And then that would sometimes become an issue.
Okay.
And I think that's what made me feel, I don't want to have to think about all that. This is not, I am not making that choice. My school skirt, right?
Yeah.
most kids get new uniforms each year at least.
Yeah.
And I didn't every year. Like, so sometimes my hem would be taken out. And it would be that, like, that slightly faded and slightly, and I was a very tall kid, right? So I did not actually want that, So I chose not to do that. So I actually have even greater admiration for my parents for being able to do that. Also, times have changed. I think the sort of valorization and not just the valorization, I think that generation, that was the first generation that was really, or maybe the second generation that was building India.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were pre-partition.
No,
at least
no,
that was
that old. that was our grandparents.
The grandparents,
right?
Pre-partition, but the next generation and the first, I guess, professionals, right? The first generation of professionals who were building India at that point of time.
So that generation grew up in a more modest time, where you had two kinds of cars. You had an Ambassador and you had a Fiat, and where money was not valued as much as it is now. And because it didn't create that many options, right? You had Doordarshan and then you had and I think our generation is different because the Gini coefficient is much greater. So the differences between the poor and the rich is much greater, right? So then you can see people who
have a lot and have very little.
Have a lot and have little. So I think our structural task is to narrow that. And I think our structural task as a polity is not only to have all boats rise with us. And I think as people and as women, women do that more often. There's lots of data from the Panchayati Raj institutions, for example, which is partly why I think the Women's Reservation Bill is so vital, right? But I think that has to be narrowed, the absolute levels, but also the relative levels, right? But at the same time, I will say that, just money has a different meaning now, and I am very happy to be comfortable, and the government schools here are very good, but not to have to rely on them. The public healthcare system is bad. Even just having a decent, normal life actually takes quite a lot of money.
What does money, apart from giving you just a certain standard of life, agency. What does it mean for you? Agency.
So money to me, at its core, is agency and freedom, right? The freedom to choose the work I want, the freedom to give money where I want, the freedom to have free time, which is, I think, very, very important. I think that those are the three main things. Also, healthcare.
We're going to segue into the last section of this. We're going to talk a little bit about the business of law and now what new age tech is doing. Right? First, let me talk a little bit about your practice, Karuna. You have actually built one of the most formidable legal practices in the country by having a very diverse body of work, right? The human rights work, the commercial litigation work, the international advisory work, the arbitration work that you do. All of them individually sound extremely hard to build a leading practice. The fact that you've been able to do all of it together for the last 2 decades, that's exceptional. Has one come at the cost of another? I've heard you say that the corporate work helps pay for the human rights work. Has it ever been that a corporate client has walked away from you because of your human rights work?
Yes. So till about 2010-ish, I had a sort of regular practice, all different kinds of things, right? I was doing a lot of international work. I was advising governments even then. But I had the mix of commercial, this mix that you're talking about. It's from the outside, this is how I designed my practice.
All right.
Wow. So at Columbia, even though I was a fellow there and doing my LLM at the same time, I did the transnational litigation and arbitration. I did human rights. However, in 2010, ish, I started to get quite well known for the constitutional and human rights work and the gender stuff, right? So my commercial work actually dropped,
Oh, wow. Okay.
you know? And then I also started to get congratulated and better known for the commercial work. So I got an Economic Times award. I got the most powerful women in business from Business Today. And so then that started happening. And today, the interview stuff and the TV stuff, etc., like focuses on legislation, policy, constitutionality, and gender, right? But I found that people were sometimes also, but then there's also the other reputation, right? There's the court reputation, there's the other reputation, and there's a reputation in general that you get for excellence and for honesty, which is a little weird because when people first came to me and we said, we're coming to you because you're honest, I said, okay, I didn't realize it was a rare commodity, you know? Yeah. And it is. I mean, it's not rare. It's not rare. But it's valued.
Yeah.
You know, to not be influenced by the powerful other side. You know, even in the Paytm case,
yes,
right? It was a telecom case. And Vijay Shekhar sent some people over and they said, but you don't pick up the phone. I said, that's because my number is very well known, right? So I get too many calls. But they said, so we had to come over, but we have been asked to brief you. And I said, well, I'm very honored, but I've never done a telecom case in my entire life. I will recommend someone else. And they said, no, we want you to lead this case and we know you'll figure it out.
Wow,
right?
Incredible.
So I built out my team from my core team, and I had briefing counsel that only did telecom, right? That knew to dot the I's and cross the T's. And my learning curve was sharp. And then I brought the alpha and brought in others, and we won it. You know?
Yeah. And it was, in fact, India's first blockchain regulation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So there was a really path-breaking win.
Yeah, it was. And we also had Dushyant Dave, who I brought in, who was a huge addition to this particular interaction with the bench. And so now I think it's very different.
Yes.
Now I think it's very different. Now I have a variety of work. The only interview I've ever done is of Fali Nariman, who was a sort of doyen at the bar for, until he died even. And was on the opposite side of me in the Bhopal cases. He was representing Dow and Union Carbide, which he then later said he regretted. He didn't hold it against me that I wrote an op-ed saying, as in the sarcastic way, as the leading jurist Fali Nariman said, right? But in this conversation with him, we talk about not specializing and how life isn't in silos and the law isn't in silos. So you have cases where you have the aspect of corporate veils, you have IP law, you have criminal law, you have a constitutional aspect. Not all cases, but there are some cases like this, right? And to be able to do a variety of things is, I think, essential. Now, traditionally, at the highest level, Supreme Court lawyers have not specialized. And it's because what you really get is a question of law. But I also built out my experience. So you didn't mention the criminal law, for example. About 10 to 15 years ago, I realized that this was a gap in my experience and I started to do criminal trials. So I couldn't do it by myself, right? Because I didn't have the experience. So and I was quite young also. I mean, I wasn't young. I was a young girl. And the fees, the substantial fees that I had there, most of it then went to my colleagues who did have the experience. And I learned from them. I made sure that they were backing me when I was arguing. Sometimes they would argue, in the same matter. And then I now have, substantial criminal trial experience. Right. So when I'm arguing the criminal case in the court, I have that experience to back me up.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not just an abstract question
Yeah.
of law.
It's
right?
so it's by design you've been incredibly structured in kind of building that
Exactly.
diversity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I also love it. I like doing different
Yeah.
things. I love tax law. People look at me like kind of horrified, but I was doing these indirect tax cases a lot at one time, and I would talk about it at parties.
I can't see that becoming a very popular party topic.
It was not
though.
very popular party topic.
Yeah. Do you believe now, in the age of AI,
Yes.
that this is diversity is ever more important?
Diversity.
Of just knowledge, right? Or certain kind of building a diverse skill set becomes even more important. Um, you know, you I think tweeted a post about Anthropic.
Yeah.
Anthropic at the same time, around the time when
Yes.
you made that tweet, had published a study which
Yeah.
says that there is an 80% overlap of AI capability with legal work.
Right.
And Dario actually predicts that over the course of the next, let's say, 5 years, 50% of entry-level jobs in the legal profession will disappear.
Right.
He says that litigators are safer because they're public facing, and they of course have this body of work, and they have that kind of in-person understanding of the bench, the judge, how to argue, which AI will obviously never be able to do. What's your relationship with AI and tech? And do you believe the fact that your extensive experience and diversity, that alpha that you said, is essentially what safeguards you as a senior professional, but what happens to your juniors?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. So many thoughts, right? I think lawyers are like plumbers to that extent, which is that you have to show up and you have to be in front of the judge. And that I think will take a while to phase out, probably after I am, dead, hopefully. Now, with regard to the knowledge of the bench, increasingly, AI has made the processing of information in terms of how a particular bench would react, in part because of websites like Indian Qanun and also the court's own initiative in making judgments public and easily accessible, and not just paid platforms like SCC and Manupatra, right? So the AI will have the ability to predict to some extent how a particular bench might react to a particular point. It's not there yet.
Interesting.
But it will, because it's not very complicated. So, for example, in a rape case, right? How often did the word character come up? Or how often did the word honor come up? Or how often did the word ravish, right, versus rape? And you see that in judgments. That will give you some indication. It's no substitute actually reading the judgment, but that's just a word search and counting the number of words. And already that will tell you something. So in our chamber, we use AI.
Okay.
But we use it in a very advised way, right? Why? Because AI is subject, unless you train your AI, and here's a free tip, that if you can train your AI to not say something when it's not sure, because I think this is the biggest problem.
Yeah, the hallucination. Right?
No, but the hallucination occurs when, like, rather than just saying, I don't know, like your AI very rarely would say, I don't know, right? And to be overly congratulatory of what you are thinking and overly supportive.
That's a great point, Karuna.
Right? And the third thing is to always cite sources.
Yes. That's something you have to definitely put in the prompt. Like in
no,
general,
you can program your AI to do it
across projects. That's true.
So that's something that I think really improves the quality of the responses you're getting, right? The second thing is that if it's above your pay grade, right? If it's above your knowledge level, bump your answer up. Always cite, like when you're giving me a note, right? A memo. If you've got part of it from AI, say I got this part of it from AI.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But in any case, like if it's bringing up a judgment, go read the judgment. This will only give you ideas. So now at my level, I am able to see this and say that this doesn't pass the smell test, you know, and this looks wrong. And this is right. This is an interesting idea that I would like to pursue. So it's very helpful in that way. But it can only be it can only be an assist.
Do you believe that this is going to have a far greater impact with law firms? Because the business of law should also change.
I just want to tell you that a friend of mine, she runs a small business outfit, just drafted her own agreement. You know? So yes.
No, because also the margins of a corporate law firm should change, right? Because if I know my lawyers are using AI, but I'm still being charged the same cost of that of an associate.
Yeah, I agree with you. The thing is that their input will still be there, no? In the sense that...
Yes, for verification, etc. But it doesn't take them the same time as drafting.
So when you have an agreement, you know, then the standard, the form that they have built up will be their IP.
Of course.
Right?
That's right.
So if they're bringing it to you, and they're essentially licensing it to you, right? What you're paying for is your version of it.
Interesting perspective.
Yeah. I know they're not licensing it to you. They are, I mean, you're buying the whole thing, right? But is the work, all the work that they've put in before to bring it to this level, so you're paying for that as well. The AI itself will not come up with some...
Sure, fair enough. They have the historical context of the matter. They have a existing
But the AI might come up with a pretty good agreement.
I do think AI will get there though, but that's the business of the economics of it, which is disrupting a lot of industries. When I talked to you about the IP, the original IP was called Alpha Girls.
Yeah.
And you said, I have a suggestion for you.
Yeah.
Call it Alpha Women, because Alpha Girls is pandering to the male trope that high-performing, high-achieving women need to be softened, and hence that's what the word girls represented according to you. And that immediately resonated with me, because the women that I am speaking with are just strong, independent, accomplished individuals who have now arrived at this career, whereby to say girls would essentially mean that they're work in progress, but that's not the case, right? Girls is essentially, makes it non-threatening in a way that you alluded to. And I agreed with that, and we changed the IP. But I want to talk a little bit about why you brought it up and how it actually struck a certain... there was a certain dissonance with what we were trying to accomplish with the IP and the name.
Yeah. I think when I spoke to you immediately, I felt that here's somebody who is really looking to talk about power.
Yes.
Right? Girls are not powerful. Girls are, because they're younger.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Girls are actually children. The rite of passage from being a boy to a man is something that is very valuable to a man. Why? Because the man gets more power, the man gets more money, the man gets more space and voice in the world, and the man gets more attractive as well, right?
That's true.
The thing is that when a girl becomes a woman, and a powerful woman, the reason that the particular kinds of gays seek to minimize that is for a number of reasons. The first, I think, is the pedophilic greater value for women when they're really quite young.
Yeah.
Models till very recently were like 14, 15.
That's right, yeah.
14, 15. Like these teenagers would start modeling and be the ideal for everyone else.
Yeah.
And the problem is not just with the individual child who's being forced to do this. Forced in many cases.
Yeah,
right?
She's now a sexual object.
But
at a very young age.
She's also a sexual object at this very young age. But also the violence it does to all the other women who are being told that you must fit yourself into the body of a 14, 15-year-old ideal, right?
Yes.
the idea of girls also comes because if you say women, then it's threatening because women are powerful. But the whole idea of having your podcast is to talk about power, whether it's threatening or not, that the person has to deal with. It's also the idea of fertility. So the idea that a girl, right, like even if you extend the girlness to the age of, say, 25, when the person really is a woman,
Yes.
is more desirable from this pedophilic gaze, like on the younger end of it, is definitely fertile, right? Is sort of fresh-faced, is not threatening. So all of this to fit, I think, the glory of women in all our shades and stripes, and into this limited little
word.
that
Was not
most women
fitting.
aren't.
Yeah, was not fitting. No, I completely
Right?
hear you. And that's why
Yeah.
we changed it.
Yes.
This is Alpha Women.
I love that.
You talked, and this is my last question to you, Karuna. You talked about bringing the alpha.
Yeah.
This show is called Alpha Women.
Yes.
What does the word alpha mean to you?
I would like it to mean not women who are the dominant gorillas. Not like alpha gorillas. I would like it to mean women who are A grade, right? That women who are excellent and, shining and spread their own light, but also foster the light of others and bring that energy and fire and light to make a better world.
And that's a great closing thought. All right. Well, that's the wrap for this conversation. This conversation was a perfect reminder to us to really evaluate and see how we normalize patriarchy as society. It's time for us to take a pause and actually question the norm. I'm Salone Sehgal, and this is Alpha Women, in partnership with Spotify and Outlook Business.